anything Kate Winslet is in is almost certainly sure to be good. And this is another case where if it's not good, you can rest assured that she will be. I've said this before about a few actors, and Kate Winslet is definitely one of those people. With that, we're going to jump in and look at a movie called Lee. Let's discuss. So the English Rose, as she is sometimes referred to, has given us another powerhouse performance in the decidedly unglamorous, more raw role of Elizabeth Lee Miller, who was a one-time sought-after New York City model turned war correspondent during the Second World War. And this movie is about that journey, directed by award-winning cinematographer Ellen Kuras. This is her first movie, her first feature-length project, and it's a heck of an offering. I'm sure she's made some stuff before. I just like maybe shorts or something like that before, but this as a feature, you could do a lot worse than this. This is a serviceable feature, and what makes it extra good is, of course, Kate Winslet. And then also without Kate Winslet, you have a sound subject. Lee Miller was a remarkable woman. Just her life, if you look her up, she's got such a rich life history. Actually, there's so much more about her life that could have very well been a part of this movie, or it could have been separate movies. She's such a remarkable character in her own right. So I think you have a good subject that's ripe for a solid story to be told. But what elevates it is a performance by someone like Kate Winslet, who we already know is a G. And she definitely does not disappoint in this movie. So many things that work. There were a couple things that I found questionable. Now, and I'll get to that. But so generally, this story is packaged as it's told mostly in flashback. So you have an older Lee Miller telling her story to a journalist, which was a package that I wasn't sure about. I wasn't sure about that form. I feel like it could have been just as effective, if not more so, if it were told straight, like in real time. But that's my opinion. And I'm not fully set on that either. I just felt like after I'd seen it, it just felt like, oh, I wonder if you lose something by having the story told in flashback, because Lee made it through things. She made through a lot of stuff. If you know about her, this is not anything that ruins the story for you. But as a real life person, she'd lived through the war, and subsequently had a life. And I wonder if you were new to Lee, it may have been more effective to have the story told straight. So the crux of the story really is Lee is an artsy person. She's living a rather carefree life, bohemian lifestyle. She has lovely friends who are artists and poets in Europe. This is where when we first meet her, Prime Lee, what I call younger Lee, Prime Lee is living this sort of life, and she meets her husband among this group of friends, and it's lovely, and they're just having fun all the time and doing art, and then the war. Meanwhile, the war is happening, but when it gets really real, things change for Lee, and she wants to get more involved, and this leads to her wanting to document the war. At this stage, Lee's already taking pictures. She's an avid photographer, and she's pretty good. And so naturally, it leads to her wanting to take pictures and document the war. And naturally, this becomes a problem because as a woman, women were prohibited from being close to war zones, combat zones. But that changes when the United States joins the war effort. And there's still some pushback, but once the U.S. joins, Lee is assigned to be a war correspondent. Along the way, Lee begins collecting stories. Through her photos. The photos and the stories are interchangeable because the pictures tell stories. And this is something that I learned later, that she wasn't really a writer, but she taught herself how to write and write these articles that were companion pieces to the photographs she took, which were already striking. She goes around to these different locations throughout the war, photographing stuff, and it's heavy stuff. So you can imagine what that journey did to her, the toll it took on her and everyone around her. I'd read this years ago. I can't remember what I was researching. I was researching something else, and I came across an article about Lee somewhere online at an old job, and I'll never forget because this job we had there was space when you weren't doing a lot of work. You could just kind of lollygag, or at least that's what I was doing. So at certain points, I was just doing research for other things I wanted to write, and I came across this article about Lee Miller, and it talked about how at the end of her life, her photographs were discovered in an attic by her son. So she never talked about a lot of this work. I mean, people knew she was a photographer, and she never publicized the pictures she took. And after her death, like this treasure trove of thousands of photos and manuscripts and things she'd written in relation to the photos were discovered in an attic. And I think the beautiful thing about that is that we have now the Lee Miller archives that was started by her son and his wife. And I think it's a beautiful gift that we all get to see. Imagine if no one ever found those pictures. It's like there's a ton of that would be a real loss to not see through the lens of Lee what she saw during the war. Because of Lee and people like her, generations after get a glimpse, and you can almost touch the energy of those pictures. And there's something about them that's still so alive. The other thing that's really cool about that is that this movie talks about the war, but we don't see a lot of the harrowing, gruesome images that you might see in other war pictures. This is a story that shows the war and the impact of the war through Lee's pictures. And I think that's a cool way to get some of Lee's work in this movie that's based on a biography about her. So like, why wouldn't you use her pictures? If the movie is in direct conversation with Lee's photographs and the legacy of Lee, having her son be involved in the project. So obviously the movie is pretty solid overall in terms of the acting, and visually it's beautiful, and the writing is mostly strong. There are a couple instances where I found the writing to be questionable. One of the glaring ones, it's the one that sticks out to me that I carry with me. The one that made it through the viewing that I'm still thinking about, which is that there's a scene where Lee meets her husband among the group of artists and lovely people, Lee's friends. And there are movies that do this where it's a scene between a man and a woman, or a prospective love interests, and there's dialogue that sort of sets them up as a match for each other, where both people are sizing each other up through the dialogue. And it happens here. And I don't know, personally, I don't feel like it was as strong. I just kept thinking of other movies that did it better, that were stronger in how they matched couples. Namely, one that comes to mind is Casino Royale, the 2006 Casino Royale, Daniel Craig's first James Bond movie. It's a dialogue scene between Bond and Vesper. That's an amazingly well-written, tightly written, well-delivered sequence, where it feels like it's an action scene almost. It's like the way they joust. They're jousting each other in their dialogue. reading each other like a book, and it's really the craftsmanship on display in the writing is amazing. It's one of the scenes that I know, cause that's probably the Bond movie I've watched the most of all the ones, all of them. I've watched them all millions of times, but that one is one that really caught me. And I was like, cause I'd read the book, previously, and right before I'd seen the movie, and was in love with how faithful an adaptation that film was. But the book doesn't do this. The book doesn't have a really a scene between Bond and Vesper the way that the movie does, how they match each other. It's very well done. It says a lot when you want to go back and rewatch a dialogue scene in the way that you want rewatch an action scene. That's what that scene does. I think The Dark Knight Rises does it also. This is a scene between Bruce and Selena Kyle at the dance, the ball, the masquerade ball, or whatever it is that they're at. That's a good dialogue scene. It's not as good as Casino Royale, I don't think, but it's pretty close. And I think the scene in Lee, it feels serviceable. I feel like it could have been written in a way that was more effective, that felt more rich and less like okay. This one just feels like, oh, it's okay. It works. It does the job of setting up Lee and Roland as love interests. It's pretty obvious. It's pretty clear. You know immediately before they even talk. You already know what time it is when you see the dude roll up. It's just like, all right, she's beautiful. He's beautiful. You know what it is. It's not a secret what's happening. But I kept thinking of movies that did that type of scene, that type of dialogue sequence better. Again, the other thing I wasn't sure about, I mentioned this at the top of the review, in the structuring of the story, having Lee tell her story to a journalist who seemingly maybe is important, but we don't really know who this guy is. By the time you get to the end, there's a sense that, at least for me, it might have been more urgent to have the story told in real time without the journalist. Have Lee tell us the story. Like, we could be the journalist, so to speak. I think it would have, but then now that I'm talking about it, it almost feels like you've seen that kind of biographical type of movie before, where the main character is narrating the events of his or her life to the audience. And in that way, it could have just been another run-of-the-mill biographical situation. So the structuring of having it be told in flashbacks and have an older Lee tell a story to a younger journalist is different. And I appreciate that. I can appreciate it. But a part of me feels like it loses some agency, some electricity, some urgency. Aside from that, everything else is pretty solid. The movie has great relationships drawn out really, really well between Lee and her editor. That's a beautiful, real relationship. And I love the relationship between Lee and Andy Samberg's character, who is the other photojournalist that she's traveling with. That's a beautiful, genuine relationship. And also the relationship between Lee and Marion Cotillard's character, who is also a really dear friend of hers. You really believe the love between them, all of them, each of these people. There's genuine connections and genuine care there. That's one of my favorite things in movies and in stories, where the dynamics at play aren't always between all the main characters. I think the main character how the main characters move with secondary characters, or how main characters move with people who are not even secondary characters, who's like the next door neighbor or the little girl on the street or whatever it is. Like, those little interactions that are really only account for like maybe a couple seconds in a movie do a lot for me to make it feel more lived in and more real. It makes these characters feel more like real humans. How everything you do isn't always about forwarding the plot. How sometimes along the way of moving the story forward, you come across these people who populate the world that you just so, hey John, blah blah blah. Like, they don't mean anything to the story, but they're little things that flesh out the character. They make them feel more rich, more lived in. And this movie does that with the secondary characters and everyone else around Lee. Anyway, this is probably not going to be, I don't think it's going to be a lot of people's favorite war biographical war drama type picture, but I would definitely recommend you watch it for Kate Winslet because she's excellent as she is in everything. So if you're curious at all, you might give Lee a shot just to see. And if nothing else, it might turn you on to researching Lee's life. Like I watched the movie and then I ended up going back and doing some more research, looking up Lee and remembering all the stuff that I'd forgotten about what I'd seen about her before. And she had a remarkable life. And Lee actually, she was very beautiful. Like, so you could see, oh, she was I mentioned she was a model who turned war correspondent. She had something about, there was a fire in her. You can see how there aren't a lot of people who would give up the kind of life that she was living prior to being a war correspondent to do that. Something else is going on. She was more than just a pretty face. She had a lot going on inside and a lot that she was grappling with. And the movie gives us a taste of some of that. So if you're curious, you might check out Lee because it's not too bad. And Kate Winslet is great. So, and I can say that with confidence. She's great. Even if you don't like the movie, you will appreciate Kate Winslet's performance. So there you go. That's going to do it for this review on Lee. Thank you for watching this video. As always, come on back. We've got some more reviews coming up again really soon. In the meantime, I'm getting out of here and I will see you guys in the next video. Take it easy.